Welcome to the third episode of the Interstice podcast, and we left off before with rowing. But I thought for brevity's sake and to get to more of the Japanese life that is kind of the whole point of this video, I'll jump ahead now to through university, through all the time I spent there, through work that I did following university, to immediately then arrive at when I first came to Japan. Maybe a little bit of the lead up as well, armed with my 7 Endai Holdings coffee, which is amazing. It's a dangerous thing here. I have to be careful with how many of these I have. So my application process, I looked around as you do, and with very little background, I went on Craigslist because that was the popular thing for looking for jobs when I was living back in Vancouver. And on Craigslist, I found this company called Teachaway, and it's crazy the number of layers that there are to these dispatch companies when you first go looking into them, because Teachaway was a middleman to a middleman, essentially. The Teachaway that I went through was working with Interac, so they find people for Interac, and then you go over and you work for Interac. And it's so funny to me, of course, when you look back with clarity on these things, how overexcited you are and how over nervous you are. I made a video recently on my channel talking about stop worrying about these garbage English teaching companies. But I do recognize the kind of like inevitability that is when something is new and you're not acquainted with it, how it's really intimidating, like it was for me when I was first figuring it all out. But I was at university. Again, I think I was bringing up my GPA and working on that. I thought, what am I going to do after this? And if you watch my channel, you caught here and there that I had a very long-term relationship, very long-term. It was 3 years, the longest relationship I've had. And for that reason, I'd put the Japanese thing, going to Japan, on the back burner. But that relationship came to an end, as so many things will. And once I did, I have my great friend Drew, who was the reason that I was initially interested in Japan, because he left when he was about 8 years old, and I wondered, where did my friend go? And he said to me, you should check this out, look into it. And so I did. I thought, okay, well, let's get back on track with that thing that I talked about being such a significant dream for myself when I was much younger, as it related to our friendship. And I found Teachaway, and I went through the application process. And for a guy, I totally admit, like when I was younger, I was always under the impression that if you get a university degree, then there's these big, who knows what exactly they are, companies out there that once you have a university degree, that you should be able to show that by virtue of the fact that you were able to be educated, that you could find a job. But this is not the booming, roaring time or whatever came before, where I don't know where that impression came from, but that's what I understood when I was a kid. It no longer was like that. Just simply having a BA was like having elbows. Everybody's got elbows, right? Nobody needs more elbows. And so I was frustrated in the jobs that I did try and pay the bills with, that I did get buy-in, because even in them, I was finding it really hard to get anywhere. With the degree, was not able to get a serving position in Vancouver. I couldn't get that sort of problem, that catch-22, right, where they wanted people to be servers who had serving experience, and so getting somebody to train you was difficult. And you'd get into one company, for example, there's this group called Global Group in Vancouver, and they got a bunch of classy restaurants run by gangsters. Delicious food, though. And I worked there, and when I went in, the manager said, yeah, there's no reason why not. Like, work here in the other roles that are required before you would train for a server, and there's no reason you couldn't move up. But then within something, there's always huge turnover at these places, right? And so within, I think it was half a year, that guy was out. So the person who had promised that I might have some upwards momentum was gone from the restaurant, and so was any opportunity for me to progress there and to actually become a server. And these places, They were like, they actually had career level servers at these restaurants. So you're not going to be rolling in money, but you're making upwards of $60K a year as a server. It was wild. I could just do a podcast on the crazy stories and adventures and shenanigans that went on while working at Black and Blue Steakhouse in downtown Vancouver. But it was not to be. And did I really want to be a career server? No. How did that paled in comparison to going and living in another country and following my dream and exposing myself to all that the world had to offer beyond the immediate horizon. And so, while working there, my buddy said, apply to these guys. And my point to talk about the frustration I had with the initial jobs that I was doing was that I progressed. I got through the first interview. I got through the second interview. And it was really rewarding where I'd had so much resistance to anything that I tried to do to get any job that the fact that I would be hired for anything was pretty sweet at that time. Cards on the table. That's how difficult it was for me to find work. So it was really, really satisfying when they said, hey, we'll give you a call back. Even as I discovered after the fact, once I've worked for these people, that they'd probably hire a well-dressed chimp. But that's neither here nor there. If you can pay your rent and you are not living in your parents' basement and you're like making steps to improve your life, that's what's important, right? And that's what this was for me, trying to be accountable to myself and be self-sufficient in whatever way that I could, however I can pay the bills. And if it could just so happen that my dream is somewhat related to what I'm doing, well, that's awesome. How many people get to say that? And I got to the interview. I remember it was downtown, and I was wearing a suit into it, and we were supposed to do a mock example of what sort of class it was that we were going to do. And it shocked me there because I thought I would be maybe the most nervous because I thought no teaching experience. I'm self-taught with a number of different things beyond the Bachelor of Arts I have in history. But how am I going to apply that here? No volunteer experience or anything. But I thought, if I read up as I did, that it wouldn't be so bad. And it felt definitely in the aftermath once I did this that the most important thing, and often the advice that I give to people when they're going into these interviews at this low level for these dispatch companies, the thing that rose to the top immediately I noticed when I was in the interview was not so much with your ability, because what ability you need at these entry-level places is so minimum that that's not the issue. What the issue is for these people are all the people who come over. This blows my mind, but of course it's not so uncommon, but freak out when they're in another country. And when they're in another country, they can't hack it. They're here for a month, 2 months, and then the homesickness kicks in. Maybe they're having a difficult time at their school, although that baffles me as to how you would, but sure, this happens as well. And people leave. So if you impress upon people when you're first getting your job interviews that you are likely to stay and that nothing freaks you out about living abroad, then you're 10, 20, you're a million miles ahead of many people who go in there who give a flaky impression of, it's shooting yourself in the foot to talk about, I have a relationship back in Canada, but I think we'll be okay for the long distance, or I have kids, but I'm leaving them here. All these things are point blank going to be a refusal of you being hired because they can't count on you amidst all the other things that they have to consider to be reliable enough to complete at least the minimum yearly contract that you'll be requested to do for them. So I was like, wow, as a person who has nothing to lose, and that's why I'm going over, I'm actually positioned so much better than many, many of the people who were applying. And I noticed that with one of the guys in my interview group, because there was about 6 of us who had shown up that day to do the interview and grammar test. And so it went well. I thought when I was there that it was all right. And in pretty short order, I was called back I had the phone interview, then you had this interview, then there was another. It was a remarkable amount. I mean, so much of it being initially, you're getting your certificate of eligibility, and once they've approved you, you need to go through what would you call it? Not sorry, the process to do with your work visa. And so there was a lot of that for the months following. And as it was, you need to have however much money saved, which is practical when you're coming over here. And I actually didn't have it in the first year that they accepted me. I had... I didn't feel comfortable. I thought that maybe I could do it with the couple $1,000s I had saved, but I thought that's probably a bad policy. You don't want to go over and then be in debt. I mean, that's one of the things, if you came over with Interac, and I imagine they probably still do, is that they offer to give you some small loan that is then taken out of your salary. But that seemed like a horrible idea to me. I had been, because of school, I had been about $10,000 in debt for school loans that I'd gotten to go to school. And I knew after having paid off that $10,000 that there was no way that I was going to accept another debt again. I never would in the rest of my life. Beware debts, beware credit cards, get out from underneath them as soon as you possibly can. I had, and I wasn't going to do so again. So I waited, and I think it was a good idea. And then I ended up coming over in the year of 2013, so a little bit after the major Fukushima earthquake tsunami incident, which was so horrible here. Now, when I got over, one of the things that was so distinctive to me was first arrival. Of course it is. Of course it is. When you come over and everything is so new to you, it didn't matter where I was in Japan. So I loved it. I truly feel like I appreciated every minute of first arrival and everything that stands out because, as I've said before in different videos, you are not going to some place only marginally dissimilar to where you are if you're from the Americas. You're going to a totally different planet, essentially, in how polar opposite the culture, the buildings. I even so specifically noticed the smell when I came over. I was like, wow, this is a very interesting alternative smell for a million different reasons that it's like that. From the chemical products that they use to the sort of agriculture that they're doing. Everything was so different and so exciting, and landing. I was on cloud nine. And when I came over, there was a training group that you were going to go to this hotel. And from the hotel, I believe we did orientation for about 1 week. Yeah, it was a little over like 10 days, 1 week. That's how long the orientation was going to go for. And I met some really, really wonderful people when I was there. There was one guy who had a fascinating story where he had met a woman in the States, I believe. He was like an Olympic power lifter, really interesting guy. Olympic powerlifter, and he'd met this Japanese woman, and they'd had a child, and they then went through a divorce. But as he described it, it wasn't really, really messy. This wasn't about them hating each other afterwards. As relationships do, they come together, they fall apart. We're all made of stars. And he had thought, though, when he was in America, he had given custody of the child to her. And she really, really, really wanted it. I think it was, at that point, it was sort of to avoid a bit of a legal battle where they were on good terms, but she desperately wanted the child. And he was like, well, I don't want the child to be away from the mother. But it put him, obviously, because he loved his child, he didn't want to be away from it, put him in a really difficult position. And ultimately, I thought this is one of the most noble things a guy could have ever done. And obviously in his interest because he gets to see his son, but he decided that where she was going to go back to Japan and move away from the States, that he would follow. And he didn't do this initially. This was like the child had been away for something like a year or two, only 2 years old, something like that. And he wanted to be there so the kid would know who their father was, and what as I say, what could be more noble. And he was willing to move to Japan, not to rekindle the relationship. He made that clear to me. It wasn't here, and he made that clear to her. I'm not looking to, we don't have to be together, but I'll do what I can to be in proximity to the child that would allow me visitation, that I could come and see him if you would allow that. And she said, he said she did. She accepted that. Thank the great spaghetti monster in the sky, because if she hadn't, what a cruel, cruel woman. But she did, and she was willing to see him. So he had come over in only way that he knew how. He had worked on he was like an airline mechanic before that. And so he wasn't going to be able to get airline mechanic work over here. And so he came over however he could, which was through teaching. And now he was going to try and get a placement that would put him not so far away from his son. I believe it was his son and his ex-wife that he would visit them. And what a fascinating person to meet. Another person, these things have stayed with me. Another guy there was an author. And it was fascinating because I went on to write my book, Stoneheart. I will write more. And he was a great inspiration for me. And then I met this other girl who's like really into reading as well. And when I first arrived, I had my e-reader. She gave me on a USB key like 1,000 books. It was a really, really nice group of people that I had first had my training with. And it was so fun, all the cultural missteps, not even so bad, but of course not yet being familiarized with everything, all the goofy little things you do, all the little things that you notice. And one of them, of course, has to do with the language, where we were going down each morning to have our breakfast, and then we'd walk over to the training building where we would continue our orientation or whatever it was. And when I went downstairs the first morning, there was a woman there, and she was serving out, it was like Chinese breakfast or something at the hotel that we were at. And I walked up to the room, and she looked at me and said, "Dozo." And it totally froze me because I had nothing. I'd grabbed a beginner Japanese book from Chapters, and there's nothing that can prepare you for actually being in the culture and people speaking at you, because when you read the words off of the page, I don't hear how it sounds, and I hadn't thought to use YouTube at that point. So I had no idea what this means. I just kind of looked at her. And of course, she had an inviting smile. So, okay, I went in and I had my breakfast. Then I messaged Drew later, and I was like, what does this mean? That's the friend, major reason I came over. It was like, oh, that means like, go for it, or like, you know, help yourself. I was like, oh, okay, well, that makes sense. coming into the place where she was serving breakfast. And then orientation was interesting because it's so much of a monkey mill when you're working for these places to begin with, that I thought there would be like valued teaching information that you would receive at this point. And instead, it was almost entirely given over. There was like a mantra that was repeated, which was, whether in doubt, or basically don't think for yourself. If there's something that you intend to do, you should contact the company and see if it's okay. And the reason that things are weighted in this way when you come over is because there's almost nothing that you could basically screw up at the job if you were working in a junior high school for a public school. But what you could screw up doesn't have to do with teaching. It has to do with sort of etiquette issues at the school. Say something to do with your dress, something to do with your behavior, nothing to do with how you would teach. And that's when it first started to dawn on me. I was like, maybe this won't be as difficult as I thought that it might be. And yeah, very quickly I understood that if you're thinking about breathing, call the company. And if you're thinking about putting your shoes on, call the company. Just make sure everything's clear and that it's okay, and you don't cause a stir and lose our contract with this very, very important prefecture or wherever it is that you're working. And so it was a breeze. And most of the days to begin with were more about simply enjoying the environment that I was in than so much worrying about the content of what it is that I needed to learn, because there really was nothing. I didn't need to be told not to be stupid, although apparently a lot of people do, or the company is so scared that this is the policy that they'd taken on for when people are coming over initially. And I had some wonderful experiences, simple things, like going for the first time. I don't know which park it was in Tokyo, but I went to a park in Tokyo and I brought my ebook, and this was when we were done on whatever day. And I remember, of course, that moment sitting there in the park and thinking to myself, I made it. I'm really here. I fulfilled something of a personal dream for myself, if only to have arrived in the country. And that felt really, really, really good. I was proud of myself, and I felt good about myself, and I liked myself in that moment. It was really, really, it was great. And we then, the other things that I think about at this time are like the stupid things I was mentioning, the sort of goofy stuff that I did where, of course, they have in Japan. I've done videos about this now. It would be funny to do like a dedicated video to talk about it. But of course, when you come over to Japan, there's this sort of detail with money that you very rarely actually hand money directly to people. And I don't know the Japanese word for it. I should. But there is a little tray that's usually on the register, and that's where you place your money. And I was looking around and I was like, why the hell is everybody doing that? And it's a special respect given to money here, I suppose, which is kind of interesting to me, where you wouldn't bat an eye, were you in Canada, to directly hand somebody money. In fact, I think, unless I've been here too long and I've forgotten it, that's what you do. You hand people money in Canada, right? And so that was a really, really funny thing. And then I remember being in the store, and I'm a fairly open-minded eater, but when I arrived, I wanted to have a little bit of comfort, and I was like, oh, I'll go to the supermarket and I'll get something that's relatively familiar, and that'll keep me going and not freaking out about everything that's around me to start. And so what I chose were these little buns, and of course everything's small and cute here. All the portions are hilariously Japanese, but they were buns, and I felt at home grabbing these because what could possibly be alien or strange about a bun? And I felt this way until I bit into one, and at which point I tasted for the first time anko. And anko is red bean paste, and I don't like it. I don't like it one little bit. It's funny because I've gone on to enjoy, I like natto now. But anko, it's so mealy, the texture of it, the beans is not that satisfying. It's this almost, it's like sweet that hasn't committed. It's almost sweet enough to be tasty, but not too sweet. It's somewhere in sweet limbo, and I don't like it at all. And so that immediately oh no, and I had to peel off parts of the bun that weren't, saturated by anko, and that cracked me up. It was a source of humor for me, definitely, because I was like, wow, I can't even buy buns without running into something that's different here. So that's quite entertaining. All the training wrapped up pretty fast, and you had the things that were shuffled by you, which are so funny at this time, where, of course, you're naive and trusting, and they're like, oh, so you're not a full-time employee, so here it is, just sign off on this health plan here, and this is the way that we're going to do health in Japan while you work here, which is basically, some of this paperwork was the way that Interac avoids contributing to your healthcare plan, because even though you're at the school for 40 hours, they say that you're not. They say that you're at 29.5, and this avoids them having to pay the medical, so on and so forth. And then the government cracked down on this, where they said anybody in a company that exceeds this many employees will have to pay healthcare, so they can't avoid it. And then, these suave bastards over there at Interac, they then fragmented, broke the company, partitioned it, so each then department, or whatever you want to call it, gakubu, would be less than however many people was required, so that they again wouldn't have to pay. Oh, clever. Hats off to you, Interac, for so cleverly handling your finances to not have to help anyone. And so we concluded training, and at that point you were basically waiting for your placement. And my one stipulation, I didn't have many. A lot of people are requesting cities, and a lot of people want to go to the major cool ones, right? They're thinking about going to Sapporo or Tokyo or Osaka or something like that. But I didn't really care. That wasn't a priority, and I've made videos talking about the sort of unknown adventure is the one that's most fulfilling. And I said, just don't put me near the Fukushima reactor, because that would be ridiculous. It's not been that long since it happened, and it was at one point still where I was considering, they were going through a really difficult part of the cleanup that I didn't know if I wanted to be in Japan while they were finishing that process of it. But they said Dave, don't worry, we would never put anybody near there. And so here is a different alternative placement that we can offer you. By the way, I found out that they sent lots of people there. But they would, of course, tell the people who were like, you wouldn't do that, would you? They're like, oh, no. We wouldn't send people next to a reactor cleanup. That's ridiculous. Don't be crazy. Except for all the people that we do. And my placement was a town called Sammu. I thought it was Sanmu until I finally looked it up recently. No, it's Sammu. And Sammu is a coastal town in Chiba, and it's gorgeous, and I couldn't imagine now having had any other placement at all, because it's so much about the people that you meet, and I met such wonderful people there, and a part of the story that I will tell today is related to that. So I arrived, and it was funny, the guy was trying to pump it up to me. It was like, it's got a McDonald's. I was like, God, I don't care. I was like, does it have a gym? Maybe more importantly, I don't need more reasons to get fat. And it did. I discovered another roundabout way that I discovered that. The awesome gym, the best gym that I have gone to, price, performance, and all that in Japan, was in Sammu. And I loved that it was a coastal city. The fact that I could be a 10-minute drive away and I would go down to the ocean, and there was some philosophical fulfillment, enjoyment, existential thing going down there and being on the ocean and thinking about that it's just open water out that way all the way over to my homeland. There was something very romantic about this thought that I really, really enjoyed. And there was enough around there that you had all the general amenities like the stores, the shopping malls, things like that. And actually, this is really cool. You were about, I think it was maybe 30 minutes away from Chiba, which is a big city in Japan. And then there was an express train that would take you, I don't know why, it just stopped at this little in the middle nowhere station, and it would take you all the way in to Tokyo for a little bit of a premium price, but that was nice. You got good seats. It's like the green car, and you could get into Tokyo in like 40 minutes. That's damn good. There's such good public transit out here, and I just so happened to luck out to be at a place where public transit was especially awesome that I got located. The distance that it was from Tokyo was really, really nice, and you had all that peacefulness and wonderfulness of being out in the countryside, and then you were never so far away from Tokyo. I, like so many other people who will come over for many years still to come, I got put in a Leo Palace, which really is, that's an interesting story in and of itself, that Leo Palace is such a shit show, for lack of a better description, and that the one that I went into, totally overpriced for the area, but you get so many things included with it, right? You get your internet's included with it, the water, all of that is included in the yachin, your rental fee per month, and can be easy to start out because you don't have to organize anything. And unless you put great effort into learning the language, then probably you need the help to get into one of these places. But I've heard of so many other people who they've come under great fire for their building practices, like that they are not up to code, and they've had to kick people out while they bring them up to code, which is horrible. I can only imagine the nightmare of people arriving in Japan and then you get booted out of your house because the people who supplied your house are absolute criminals. And yeah, the building standards of these places is really patchy because they're all over the place. They're trying to meet the demand. They're usually a foreigner box. And so I was lucky in that mine was not so bad. I have other ridiculous stories about Interac and Leo Palace, which I will, of course, share. I think we can get to all this. Now, I would be remiss to not talk about, as I said, there was these people that I met along the way. And first, I'll go with my Japanese teacher. So I got over here and I thought, I got to learn this language. I'm going to look around and see if anybody at the company can point me in the direction, that's the office for Interac, can point me in the direction of lessons so I would be able to start learning Japanese. And one of the women at the office was kind enough to look up where I could go for lessons. And so I did, registered, went in that day, and it was pretty intimidating. They were doing these group lessons where people were separated into groups depending on their level of ability. And of course, I'm total greenhorn. I have no idea what's going on. I got this one book about Japanese that I've brought over and I'm clueless. And I got put into a group that was low level, but I don't think you could have been low level enough for me. And I had that classic mean kid experience, like when you first go to school. It was so shitty, where there was some girl in the group and they were practicing hiragana. And I was like, oh, I don't really know how to do this. She's like, you don't know how to do hiragana? And I was just like, I will kill you, bitch. Not really, but in my mind, I hate you so much. And that was such a negative experience. I was like, man, I don't want to go back here to listen to some uppity bitch talk about me not knowing how to do hiragana. I'll do it on my own. Forget this. And I went out into the hall, like the sore loser that I was, and was going to abandon the class. But then this Japanese woman followed after me and said, no, was the lesson not good? And I said, it's too much for me. It's a little above my level at this point. I think I should practice and then maybe come back once I can do a little better than I currently can now, because I can't contribute. And she said, okay, I see, I understand. It can be tough when you're first starting out, can't it? In a very compassionate way that she talked about this. And I thought, yeah, well, thank you very much for understanding that. It is, life's hard, of course. And so I left that day and I went back to my apartment and, bemoaned my loss of having lessons, where I should have stuck it out. But then sometimes when the cosmic dice roll in your favor, I got an email from Interac a couple days later, and it was to say that woman had contacted them and asked if I would like to have private lessons, if she could come by my house and she would teach me one-on-one. It almost brings a tear to my eye just to bring up this woman every single time, because that kind of active kindness, to go so out of your way to help someone you have no reason to. It's the reason that we should probably address global warming and not blow up the planet for the next wonderful people who come along like that. And she started to teach me lessons at my house, and it was amazing. She was great. Had I had my head screwed on a little tighter, I would have thought to take the JLPT at that time, because it would have focused my efforts. But again, allowing intimidation to get the better of me, I was like, I don't know. I'm not JLPT material. I'll wait until I get better to do it. Always waiting, always putting it off. With some things, it's funny because I don't usually do that, but with the language, I found it so intimidating that I did. But it was because of her I had all these cool experiences in that area, in Sanmu, because she lived around there, and she wanted to take me to this museum that's theme was hyperrealism, called the Hoki Museum. It was amazing. I've not been to a lot of museums in my life, and the art that I saw in that place was jaw-dropping, absolutely jaw-dropping, the things that I saw in there with her. And then there was a time she wanted to take me along the coast to see the coast of Chiba. And then there were times when she wanted to take me to a Kyoto traditional style meal, because she wanted me to have a good experience in that way. There was a time when she took me to this incredible spring festival where I met a bunch of her retired teacher friends and spent the night getting wasted on whiskey and winning chocolate bananas at the yatai stalls. And I love this woman. I actually like, in the way the non-eros to just love somebody. I love this woman. Misako Sensei is such an incredible piece of what I've come to understand Japan means to me, and what it could mean for someone if they came here. Such a wonderful, wonderful woman. And so that was a huge part of Sanmu, maybe I met some other wonderful people, because there are these wonderful people all around the world, but I cannot imagine having missed the opportunity to meet this woman. She was incredible. And then the other guy that I met, his name was Chopper. Now, his name is not actually Chopper. His name is Chopra, Gurmeet Chopra, but he knows the character from One Piece, and all the kids called him Chopper at his school. And so he went with that name. He so enjoyed the nickname. That's what he enjoyed being called. And Chopper was my brother from another brown mother. He was ethnically Indian from the UK, and we hit it off immediately. A great, gentle soul. I've met a few people like this in my life. You never met someone kinder and gentler than him. Wouldn't drink a drop of alcohol, but one of these people who never ever, he didn't judge. It wasn't like they weren't drinking to make a point about how they were better than you. He didn't drink. He had his personal reasons to do so. But it never stopped him from hanging out with me if I wanted to drink and having some of the best conversations in my life with this guy. And he was a real conversationalist, which I really appreciate and enjoy. And there was so much that was impressive about him in that I think he had been in the country for 2 years by the time I had arrived. And he was an exceptional teacher. Whereas I taught junior high school, he was an elementary school teacher. Elementary school teachers so often do so much more than junior high. It doesn't have to be that way. I don't want to put out the fire of any junior high school teacher who's really carrying their weight and doing cool stuff, but just so happens to be. And Chopper's Japanese was so good after only 2 years. Now, he was very humble about it, and he talked about how he had the advantage because he already spoke Hindi. He spoke 2 languages already, and he said that there were grammatical similarities between the 2 languages, or Hindi that he spoke and Japanese, and that gave him a leg up. But the guy's just being humble. Yes, absolutely, it's true. It contributed to him knowing a little better, but the amount that he spoke within just that period of time, like he could have easily, I think when I met him after 2 years, passed the N2. And it was so cool to see him speak the language. But it also shed some light on, there is this, I don't even know how to discuss it exactly, because it's kind of, what do you want to call it? I guess, yeah, in a sense, it is a sort of white privilege or white assumption that can be made in Japan, which it's so funny because the assumption is so incorrect. Where he spoke incredible Japanese and I didn't. I mean, I just arrived as well. That's, I got an excuse. And a lot of the times people, if I were out with him, people might assume that I was the one who would speak better Japanese. And I believe that was some sort of association with white people and white people being successful in, I don't even know why. I don't know why white people were assumed to have gotten acquisition of the language more easily. Because, to tell you the truth, if you go to the JLPT, as I frequently do, and fail frequently, but I've passed as well, that you'll notice that the vast, it'd probably be something like 95% of the population there are of a much darker tone of skin than myself. And this is a case where I am a total minority, and it has to do a lot with where when these people have come over from whatever country they're from, be that Tibet or Malaysia or anywhere really, that they'll often work in a position that they absolutely have to speak Japanese, and in many cases that's mandated to them. And so they're going to work hard to learn the language, where I think that if Caucasian people come over here, as they so often do, on, say, like a working vacation kind of drive, and they're not that determined, that they could get here and easily go without learning the language, and that would have no impact on their lives, where the urgency isn't there for them, and so they don't. Yet, people might assume that because you're white, you somehow are definitely the candidate to speak the language better. Not something... I don't know a lot of the reasons surrounding that, but I did notice it, and I felt some sympathy. I wouldn't say empathy, because I didn't live that exact experience, so I can only sympathize with it, how frustrating that would have been for him. But it didn't impact his relationships. He was beloved at his school and in the community, where he always talked to we'd go out and there'd be a little cashier and he'd talk to the cashier, or he'd go here and he'd talk to this person, that person. And at the schools, they really loved him. He was also a musician. He was like constantly practicing piano at his school, which I thought was really kind of this kind of cool detail. Again, it's this kind of like whimsical detail about Chopper Sensei at their schools. And when he did eventually leave, he told me this really poignant moment where oh man, it's like I can't, it's hard to describe now, these sort of things that Japanese people will do to like, where they're usually so reserved. There's moments where it's like they're mercilessly emotionally manipulative to create a profound moment where you're like, you guys are all just acting like this to really ramp up the emotional feedback, aren't you? Which is silly and wonderful at the same time. And he was playing piano on his last day, and all these people brought up flowers to him while he was playing piano. And at the door, they did this big like, "Otsukare-sama desu," and they're like, "You will be missed." And like, they do this yelling thing. They do it for like when they graduate some of the kids, where they all come into the office and they all blah 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 blah. Itsumo like oshiete kudasaimashita, like arigatou gozaimasu, like all this like, I don't know why it's yelled, but it's like, it's this cry of passion to be grateful for something. And he said like he and all the other teachers at that time, they all broke down and cried. Man. Yeah, so Chopper was a great guy. And he had some interesting experiences with Interac as well, where he wanted to get a raise from them because he'd been with them for a couple years. And it was like they were going to play hardball. I'm actually surprised, spoiler alert, he got it in the end, but it was under such funny circumstances where he said, "I'd like you guys to pay me this much." And he was an accountant back in the UK. And so he broke down the numbers and made it a very reasonable request that he had as a result of, time spent, the results that he had at the school, the way he was liked, all this stuff. And they said, "No, we're not going to do that for you. Meh." And then he said, "Okay." And it was like, I don't know if they thought he was like bluffing, or I'd assumed they don't even care because they have such high turnover. But they said, "No, we won't do it." And he said, "Fine, I'll quit." And then they got back to him within a week and they were like, "Actually, okay." I guess they were having trouble filling the position because we were so far out in the boonies and they didn't want it to look bad on the contract. But they were like, "We'll give you the raise. We'll give you the raise. Just please stay." And he said, "Okay." But at that point, he had concluded his contract for his Leo Palace that he was staying in. So he's in a really rough situation. And so it came to me where I said, "Well, Chopper, I don't know for sure, but if you'd like, let's see if they'll allow us to be roommates, because I know that there's obviously, these are tiny places. It's for very low income people, but sometimes couples will live in these 24 square meter places. And I got this storage space underneath my bed here. What do you think about we could share this apartment?" I wouldn't have done that with so many people, but I so respected his peaceful way that I thought that even in this very confined space, that we could still be friends. And he said, "Okay, well, I guess if you're okay with that, it's 24 square meters, Dave. That's going to be 12 square meters each kind of thing." And we got permission. And so if you've seen one of these Leo Palaces, if you've seen like videos of it, you could have seen my one viral video from the channel, Facepalm. I am not exaggerating for how small these are. And we lived in that space. And I have to say, it was one of the most painless experiences living with a roommate in my entire life. I think we had like friction for like one day. We talked it out. And then from then on, the entire time that we lived together there, it was pure equilibrium, pure harmonious balance, and grew my respect even more for how much I appreciate him as an individual and the kind of person that he was. And so he worked for one more year and he got that raise from them. And that was cool. And we ended up sharing this space, which was difficult, but also had some novelty to it. I mean, how many people can say, actually probably millions and millions of people can say this, because there's impoverished countries where houses are very small. But how many people can say when they came to Japan that they shared a Leo Palace with their roommate and that actually worked out and they didn't hate each other afterwards? So that was mighty cool. I gotta say that things worked out like they did for Chopper and I to live there together. And it was there as well where I had a very determined state of mind when I first arrived that I'd done, because there was not much else to do that brought happiness when I was back in Vancouver. I had partied a lot, and when I got to Japan, I didn't want to party anymore, and I didn't want to chase after girls anymore. And so for the first 2 years, I didn't date at all. I didn't see a single woman for 2 years after arriving here, and I arrived when I was 28. So crazy for me to think. I was like, wow, you really threw away some of your best smashing time there, Dave. 28 to 30. What were you thinking? No, I don't regret it at all, actually. And to refocus on, I want to have cool experiences, I want to meet people, and I want to separate that from the libido was a really, really good time for me. And in that time, I wrote a book. I truly enjoyed the culture. I made this incredible friend out of Chopper. And I as well, who you've seen in many videos before, and again, listening here, this is Spotify, YouTube, wherever it is that you're seeing this. There was Dean. Dean also moved into the same Leo Palace that I was at there with Chopper. And this is, like, if you don't know Dean, you're tuning into this, you haven't seen him in a video, doesn't really matter. He's a great teacher. He's actually like a licensed teacher from the UK. This is not a poser. The guy's really good, and he's worked in some tough schools and with many special needs kids. And yeah, the guy, he's exceptional. He gives me a lot of his materials, and it's very much appreciated. But he had kind of an interesting way into us like working more closely together, because he came over here with the company Peppy Kids Club. And Dean is a traveler. Like before this, he was living in Thailand for a year, living on a beach, teaching English to the natives there to support himself. Like really cool stuff. I respect his wanderlust, his desire to experience more of the world in whatever way he can on whatever budget is available. And Dean, as I say, was working for Peppy Kids Club, and Peppy Kids Club, I can't believe I could say it, but Interac, I would say, is definitely better than Peppy Kids Club. I can't believe there is. When you're going up shit mountain, there's better places to be. There's higher up. And so I had suggested that, why don't you jump ship and come over to work for Interac? You don't have to work for Peppy Kids Club anymore, and I could give you the in to work for this company, because reference is always easier, and that's usually how people get hired. And Dean was keen on that. He wanted to jump ship away from Peppy Kids Club. There's all sorts of like weird details they have about the way that you have to check in, the sort of erratic times that you're working, the holidays that you get are erratic, that you will not always have consistent weekends where it's like 2 days off in a row, this kind of thing. Lots of reasons why it would be better to move over to Interac. And I got him over on recommendation, but then he needed to move out of it's funny, all the Leo Palace shenanigans here. He needed to move out of the place that he was staying at, because that was contracted to Peppy Kids Club, and he would have to move into one of the Leo Palaces that was contracted to Interac. Now, get this load of horseshit that Interac tried to pull on him. When he was going to move, they said, oh, we have a place for you. It's actually in the same building, so you can just move all your stuff from one place to the next place. But there's the detail of the last tenants left they caused a little bit of damage, and they never actually paid for that. So if you're going to move into this new place, we're going to have to you'll have to pay for the damages that they caused. Where I can't even believe that Interac with a straight face went to him and said that. And I had his back. He told me about it. He was like, I don't think that sounds reasonable. No shit. So I went and talked to the branch manager, and well, it wasn't even particularly eloquent. I was just like, what kind of shit show are you running here that you think that you could bully someone into paying damages for a previous tenant. That's straight up illegal. Are you insane? And with actually less resistance than I thought I would get for the fact that they were already walking down Crazy Land Road. They were like, oh, well, yeah, I guess that's a good point. So it was an example where these companies were simply trying to bully somebody. And once you pointed out that you weren't going to stand for that ridiculousness, they backed off and let him have the place and didn't make him pay the cost there of whatever damages were in the building previously, which was like, what? While I was here teaching, I was at 2 junior high schools, which is actually very few when you are teaching. You can get up to like 5 schools a week, depending on how, when working for these dispatch companies, they partition your time. And that was really, really cool. One of them was all right, and then the other one was exceptional. And some interesting exposure to begin with, because when I went in there, the first year that I was there, I think it was like they were just exiting like this brutal, like really rowdy 3rd grade year. And I remember being in the halls of the school and in a classroom, and there were a couple of kids who would like physically fight the teachers, and like 3 or 4 teachers tackling kids in the hallway, and the kids tackling teachers and screaming and smashing into lockers and rolling down the hallway, tussling, wrestling with the teachers. I was like, wow, this is, yeah, you know, that outward front of being this very calm, composed society. Not always. No, definitely not. And not at the school that I was at. But this was so cool about what it was like going there, was that in junior high school you have 1st, 2nd, and 3rd grade. And because I would work for Interac and I would be there for 3 years, I would see the Ichinense graduate from 3rd grade. And when I arrived, the Ichinense were really cool kids. I really liked them. There was a ton of personality. I got this cool photo album that they gave me when I left there. And one guy in particular, he like signed something at one point. He's like, keep that. It's going to be worth a lot one day. I was like, you betcha, man. You go kick some ass. It was wicked. And so I spent 3 years at that school. And at the end of it, I did a speech at the end because I'd spent so long there and I liked them so much, and I did a full Japanese speech when I left the place, and it was all I could do not to burst out into tears. I did that in front of the school. I was like, I'm fine, until I got up in front of the entire school and gave the speech. It was along the lines, I was like, yeah, it's good to be grateful to have like a safe community where, for whatever our petty problems are, they are just that. They're petty. I mean, they're the small everyday problems that we should be grateful to have, like a relationship doesn't work out, or I have a bad grade, but that everybody around you is so caring and wonderful. It was a really, really, really cool school. And I got this great yearbook from them when I was going to say graduated, when I moved on from there. And I almost feel it. I felt it more there, maybe because the personalities are more developed, that you make a closer connection to them. But I really did have a close connection to those kids, and they were wonderful. And when I look at the book, the yearbook now, I remember the kids so very, very specifically. And you have to think as well that it was more than one class. There was class like 3-1, 3-2, and 3-3. I think there was 3 of them, and it was each one of them. Maybe I had a favorite. I was like, this is the coolest class. I really, really like this one. But each one of them, they had really, really special kids, really, really entertaining, and really, really kind staff that I worked with there. And they appreciated that I was there for the full graduation cycle that would see those kids to the end of their experience at junior high school. I even remember this was a goofy thing that I did, again, like figuring out the lay of the land, because I had started my YouTube channel in these 3 years that I was there, where I was at a sports festival and I recorded some of the sports festival stuff as I thought it's just like a cool festival. And it wasn't, I thought it was far enough removed from, I know, of course, you don't want to do something stupid like take selfies with your students and then post that on your social media. But I thought, like, a video of a sports festival, again, like distance far enough away from the kids, would be okay. Obviously, it's not. It's not okay. For the internet anyways. Maybe for like a parent's home video or something, for like, oh, here's my kid doing this. But they were amazing because I did that, and I was honest about having a channel, and one of the teachers there, Misato? Matsuo? I forget her name. It kills me I forget her name, because she was kind of like the premier teacher there that I interacted with. And she came up to me and was like, Dave, do you have videos of the sports festival on your YouTube channel? I was like, yes. And she was like, please delete those immediately. And had it been at a school that I didn't have a good relationship with, that could have been me like kicked out and deported at that time for like wrongfully uploading social media or whatever, which was pretty innocuous, pretty harmless in the grand scheme of things. Like, I don't even think you could see the kids' faces. It was like at such a distance. But again, talking about individual relationships mattering and the difference that they can make for you, clearly did for me there, because they did not throw me under the bus. In fact, they like very silently were as helpful as they could to get that dealt with and swept away, that it wouldn't become an issue. So a really, really good experience at that school.